You know, gear is very personal. It's each musician and producer has a unique perspective on what makes a great synthesizer or drum machine or groove box. All sorts of things enter into this very personal decision, whether it's your workflow, the genre of music you're creating, your skill level, your experience level. All of these play a role in these very personal choices of which gear to get. Another big player in this mix is compromise. Each piece of gear brings with it certain compromises that we have to weigh before we spend our hard-earned cash to buy that new shiny object. And nowhere in the electronic music production world has this been more evident than in the world of groove boxes. That is, until the Deluge. So the Deluge, what is the Deluge? So a lot of people have never even heard of this piece of kit. It's been around for a few years now, made by a company called Synthstrom Audible from New Zealand. A lot of people call this a boutique piece of kit because it's not mainstream, it's not from one of the big giant conglomerates out there. But that doesn't by any means mean that it sacrifices anything or has anything less. On the contrary, I have never seen a piece of kit that has as much packed into one place as this does. And what we're going to talk about today are the top 6 things that for me make this my new favorite piece of gear. This is my own personal opinion. This is what I get out of this piece of equipment. This is how it works for me and in my particular workflow, and the things that I've been looking for. May not work for you, but I would suspect that it might, because I haven't found anywhere where this really compromises. So let's start off with talking about number 1, the Synth Engine. Now, this has a full-blown synth engine in it. It is a digital synth that has some analog modeled waveforms, as well as a lot of other ways to synthesize, a lot of other things to be used as oscillators. So it has a full subtractive synth. It is also capable of doing FM synthesis. You can use samples as waveforms for oscillators within this. They have wavetable coming. There's actually already a button here for wavetable, and when you click on it, it just says in the screen soon, because that's one of the things that's going to be coming in a future update. You can use single cycle waveforms very much like you can in the Digitact, and if you'd like, you can check out the video that I did about how to do that on the Digitact not too long ago. Something else that you can do really interestingly with this, there is a line input, and you can take a live audio source from that line input and use that live audio source as an oscillator within the synthesizer and play it just as you would a traditional oscillator. Something else that's really unique about this is the polyphony. So it has virtually unlimited polyphony, and I'll use unlimited in quotes a lot during this because they don't put any sort of artificial limitations on a lot of things with this machine. You're only limited based on the RAM and the CPU power. So there is no, limited polyphony. This does have 64 voices that you can do at the same time within the synth engines here, 64 unique voices, and the amount of notes that you can play is virtually unlimited. It's only limited by storage space. A little bit later in this video, we're going to go through some sounds and how I use the sounds on this, but these are just a few of the different methods that you can use for the synthesizer. Next, let's talk a little bit about the effects. Now, the effects in this are really comprehensive. They can be used not only as performance tools, but they can also be used in sound design, because you do have effects by channel. You actually have effects by step, which we'll talk about in a little bit with the sequencer. And you've also got some global effects. So you can use certain effects on individual tracks with individual synths in order to be able to shape those sounds and create those sounds, design those sounds exactly the way you want to. The Deluge has 2 LFOs and 2 envelopes per track, and each track, as well as global, has delay, reverb, chorus, phaser, flanger, saturator, distortion, bit crusher. Another great feature of the Deluge is this does have a sidechain compressor built into it. It's not a sidechain emulator where you would put an LFO on something. It actually is a sidechain that's triggered, and that trigger is assignable. So if you want to have it be a kick on a particular track, and let's say you've got 3 different kicks that you're using, or different percussions or different drums or things like that, you can actually assign what you want to be the trigger for the sidechain. Or if you'd like, if you don't want to have it triggered by an individual instrument, you can actually create a ghost track that has a sidechain on it. So that way when the kick goes away, you can still have the kind of pumping effect of the sidechain that continues on. Another thing that's really crazy is on the back here, you've got a line input, so you can run other instruments into this and through here. And with the effects within the Deluge, you can actually live process those incoming effects. You can use that to sample them in, so you can affect a sound pre-sample and record it already affected if you want to, or you can play things through as part of a performance. So if you have an external synthesizer and you want to run it through this, you can run it in and use all the effects from within the Deluge in real time to be able to affect that sound. One of the cool things also with that line in and sound effects is the Deluge also allows you to take that line in source and polyphonically pitch shift. So let's say you have the sound of a single monotone note coming in, you can actually play that note polyphonically in key with what you're playing, and you can play it in real time, and it will affect that incoming signal in real time. The next thing we want to talk about is the sequencer that's built into this. Now, if you've watched this channel and watched some of my other videos, you know that I'm a huge fan of Electron boxes, and the biggest reason is because of their sequencer and because of what their sequencer can do. What's really interesting is that the sequencer within the Deluge can do virtually everything that the sequencer in the Electron boxes can do. There are some small differences, but virtually everything that can be done here, from having conditional triggers to having sequencer probability by step, being able to affect effects on individual notes by step and sequence that into the sequencer, changing pitch. It's doing all sorts of things by individual step. Where the Deluge really shines, and I already mentioned this, that they don't put kind of artificial limitations on things, but where this really shines is that there are virtually unlimited, and I say unlimited because it's only limited by storage space and memory, an unlimited number of tracks. So with something like the circuit tracks, which I just reviewed recently and compared with the Digitact, you know, you've got a limited number of synth tracks, a limited number of MIDI tracks, and that's kind of it. When you've got something even like the Digitact, which I think is very full featured, has 8 audio tracks that can be used for samples and 8 MIDI tracks that can be used to sample external gear. The Deluge doesn't have any of those limitations. So you can have 64 voices playing different voices, synth voices from within this at once, that with a virtually unlimited number of notes polyphonically. So you could have 64 different synth tracks with different sounds on it. You can have an almost unlimited number of MIDI tracks. You're only kind of limited by what you're assigning to. So you've got 16 DIN MIDI tracks that you can send out, 2 CV gate outputs that you can use to synchronize with outside gear and sequence outside gear, and then 2 other gates as well. So a lot of MIDI capability, and each one of those can be its own individual track. Then sample tracks, again, virtually unlimited. The only limitation here is that you can have 90 sample voices playing at the same time. So you could have 90 notes of sample polyphony if you want within this. So you're talking, you know, dozens, if not hundreds of tracks that are possible from within this machine all at the same time. There is no real limitation other than memory and CPU. When you talk about being able to sequence, one of the things that's really cool about this as well is this kind of grid matrix for being able to step sequence. You can also live record in for sequencing. The resolution of this is adjustable, so you can scroll using these knobs to scroll in and scroll out of the resolution within this grid, and you can actually get this down to 6,144th notes, I think is what it says it goes down to. Just a ridiculous amount of refinement and capacity that you could actually dial down and dial into. Other things that go along with that within the sequencer that are so ridiculously capable that you would never use them. You can go all the way down to 0 BPM as you are sequencing things within this with your tempo, and you can go all the way up to, I think, 9,000 BPM or something. It's crazy. They really didn't tack on any sort of limitations when they made the Deluge, and it's one of the things that I love. It's kind of creative freedom personified. Feature number 4 about the Deluge, which is again highly capable and frankly amazing for something this size, is the sampler and the sample capability. So you can load samples in. There is an SD card here on the front, so you can just pop this out and load samples onto an SD card from a file within your computer. You can drag and drop it. You can record samples into this live. It does record samples in stereo, which is fantastic. It does have this little mic here, kind of emergency if you needed to record something in right away. So you can get samples into this in a lot of different ways. Then once they're in there, what you can do with the samples in the Deluge puts it on par with a lot of the top samplers that are out there. So you can slice, you can edit, modify, you can cut your samples, you can change beginning points, end points, you can pitch shift them, you can layer samples, you can time stretch, which is something that things like the Digitact can't do. You can time stretch within this, which is, again, fantastic. So you can load in a whole bunch of samples into this, and whatever you're creating, you can chop those samples up and use those any way that you like within this machine, right alongside of the MIDI capability and the onboard synthesizer. As far as sampling goes, you can also layer samples on top of one another. As I said, you can have 90 samples playing at the same time. There is live looping capability within this. So if you want to use it as part of a live set, you can live loop and use that and then modify that within the box in real time. And then of course you can also resample. You can also use the samples that you either create or you load into here as waveforms for the oscillators within the synthesizer. So you can get really super weird and creative with that. You can resample something and then load it into a synth engine as an oscillator, and then modify that waveform using the effects to create crazy new sounds, and then use those within your production. One thing also with the sequencing capabilities of this is there is a very robust and really well thought out song mode within this. And it's not just a song mode as a lot of other groove boxes have, where you can link, where you can create patterns and then link patterns together and things like that. This is actually an arrangement mode, so you can copy and paste whole sections and clips. It feels very much like Ableton Live and the clip view of Ableton Live, being able to move things around and redo them, as well as create new audio clips within an arrangement while you are arranging it. So the fifth highlight for me of the Deluge is the hardware itself. I mean, the construction is durable. It's got wood sides. The buttons feel great. The knobs feel great. It's laid out in such a good way. You've also got a ton of connectivity on the back here. Regular MIDI in and out. You've got gate and CV, so you can control modular gear if you want to. You've got USB, so you can integrate this into a DAW. You can use the USB to charge it. It's also a USB host, which is fantastic. You can see the size of this is pretty crazy. I mean, it fits into a 13-inch laptop bag or 14-inch laptop bag. It's very thin, it's lightweight for everything that it does, but it's made out of metal and wood, and it's very durably built. So very heavy duty and very well built. It does have a few things that are maybe not as necessary. It does have a speaker, which, you know, I would say is probably for emergency. You've got a microphone also for emergency. Neither of them are the best quality, especially when you've got the ability to do line out. You can do headphone outputs, you can do mic line inputs, and all that stuff. So you can actually get really professional quality audio in and out of this. So those things are, I guess, if you're gonna take it to the park and use it there. One other thing that I think is great hardware wise with the Deluge, again, and we talked about this before, is this SD card. You can basically put any size, according to Synthstrom, you can really put any size SD card in here. And so that keeps you from being limited to the amount of samples that you can put in, the amount of stuff that you can take with you within the Deluge if you're going to take this as a portable piece of kit. Anything else I've seen, you are limited by some sort of internal memory, except maybe with the Octatrack. With that, you do have the removable media, but with something like the Digitac, you've got 1 gig and things like that. So you're really limited to what you can put inside them. With this, you can load up every sample pack you've ever heard of, every one shot you've ever sampled in your life, and you can put them all on here, and you can have access to them whenever and wherever you want. Of course, the most amazing part about this hardware is that it is battery powered. So this is completely portable. You see, not plugged into anything. Switch it on and it's ready to go. The battery life, from everything that I've been able to see about this, the battery life is between 5 and 7 hours using it the whole time, which is probably more than enough to take it to a coffee shop, on a flight, to the park, wherever you might want to take it to sketch out some music or do a live performance or whatever. You can also power it using a 9-volt power supply. They basically put in the same standard power supplies that you would use for guitar pedals. You can get those power supplies anywhere. And you can also power it and recharge it via USB. So if you want to use a power brick and a USB cable, however, if you are going to use an external keyboard and use it as a MIDI host, you do need to use the 9-volt power supply in order to be able to do that. That doesn't necessarily have to be plugged into the wall though. That can be one of the cables from Bird Cord, or I think my volts as well. And you could plug that into a power brick so that you could have a completely battery powered setup with an external keyboard. And the 6th reason for me that this is my new favorite piece of kit is the workflow. I've had this now for less than a week, and I already feel right at home on it. I felt at home on it the first time I picked it up, watched a couple videos. I had some of the shortcuts on a printed page next to me, but the workflow is so intuitive and inspirational. What's really amazing about this is that, the workflow, it's kind of hard to describe, but it feels like the workflow inspires you and then gets out of the way. Where a lot of other things, for example, the Electron boxes are inspirational because of all the things they can do, the amazing things that you can get them to do, and the kind of happy accident engines that they are. But that it's always kind of in the way as you're trying to flesh out those amazing accidents that you've come up with. Whereas the Deluge, it almost seems like it's there just to inspire you, and then it steps out of the way and then lets you kind of flow with your idea. It's crazy, and I'm going to show you in just a little bit about how easy it is to start a track from scratch, sketch it out using the synth engines, then modify those things, use samples, use all different sorts of synthesis, effects, sound design. All of that stuff is really intuitive. And then if you use it as a sketchbook, as I've been doing, and then you bring it back into your studio and you want to actually flesh out those ideas into a full-blown track, maybe you want to integrate it with your hardware synthesizers that you have in your studio, it integrates effortlessly into the studio setting. So I guess the best way to describe it would be that it plays really well by itself, and it also plays really well with others. It's really robust on its own. It's amazing what this can do by itself. And then being able to link this up with hardware synthesizers or a DAW or whatever your workflow happens to be, just exponentially increases the capability of what it can do, because you can take every one of those things that has any sort of a limitation within here and flesh it out into full-blown tracks, if that's what you're looking for doing. Now, I know I said we were going to talk about top 6, but there is one kind of bonus feature, and I didn't want to include it in the list because it's not really a feature. It's not something that you're going to see on a spec sheet. It's not something that you're going to be able to quantify. And that for me is the kind of vibe centerpiece of this piece of gear. It's that warm and fuzzy part that you can't really put into numbers and data and spec sheets and compare one to another machine. It's that kind of intangible thing that's in between the mechanics of a piece of hardware and the creativity of creating music in your mind. And what's amazing about this piece of equipment is that it feels very inspirational. It feels warm and fuzzy. It feels creative. It feels more like an instrument than it does a tool, where a lot of the other pieces of hardware equipment that I have for producing music feel like tools. They feel like a means to an end. This feels like something that you sit down and you want to put your hands on and you want to play. You want to use it to create and make something special. And that kind of warm and fuzziness in the middle is something that, for me, makes a really special piece of equipment. There are very few pieces of music production equipment that give that kind of feeling and vibe and inspiration. It's a rare piece of equipment that makes other synthesizers more fun to play, that encourages exploration and experimentation. And the ones that I have seen like that, some things like the OP1 and things like that, they encourage experimentation, but then they get you to a point where there's nothing more you can do with it. And for someone like me who produces music and releases music and produces full tracks, I love to have the inspiration and the exploration of something like the Deluge, and then to be able to work that into a fully fleshed out, completed, mixed, mastered, releasable track. Now, the Deluge for me is my new favorite piece of kit, and now I just want to show you a little bit how I use it to complete a track. So if you're just here to get some information about this, thanks for watching. And if you want to stick around and see a little bit about how this gets used, I'm excited to share that with you. But if you need to take off, I understand that. Thanks for stopping by. Always great to have you here. I really appreciate all the time you spend here with me, and I look forward to seeing you again in the next video. Okay, so here we are with the Deluge. Just going to get started really quickly. Basic first track here is a drum kit loaded in a basic drum kit here. Put down a 4 on the floor beat. By sound, we can adjust levels here. We can adjust by step, so if you want to have some variation. So if you mute these out, you can hear just within the hi-hats, there's some variation in there because of the different levels that we put in there step by step. As you can see, you can mute out as well. So that gets us a basic drum pattern. Then if we go back to song mode, hit any one of these pads on the next level, and it's going to get us a new track. Starts off as a synth track. We can find a bass sound. Let's adjust our scale, minor, Dorian, Phrygian. You can go through whatever scale you want to go. Let's do a minor scale. You can see it's C minor, so it's a C third, but you can adjust that. It's very easy to adjust these up and down. Now it's an A minor scale, now it's an F minor scale, now it's a C minor scale, now it's G minor scale. So it's very easy to transpose and move things around in this as well. So then within this, let's do a some effects within there. We can adjust our cutoff, our resonance. If you want to change the release and change the attack. So you've got a lot of control over each individual sample. So let's just hit another track. We've got another synth track here. Here. You can adjust the attack if you want. We want this to be pretty plucky, so add a little reverb to that. Maybe a little delay as well. Bring that level down just a little bit. So then if we create another new track here, we can do another kit track here. And instead of doing a drum kit, we can actually load in, a loop if we want to. So this takes us into a folder. We can go through. Sure, why not this one? So we'll go ahead and select that one. Then we'll put that into time stretch mode. And we'll just put that right there at the beginning. See here, that's our loop that we just added in there. And now it's time stretched with the beat that we already had in here. Let's go ahead and add one more track here. We'll do another kit. We'll hit there and we'll load in. Oops. Load in. Let's do this time. Let's look for percussion. Yeah. ahead and add that percussion. Again, we can put that into stretch mode so that we can time stretch it. And just add it in like that. And then when we hit play, we've got a combination of drum kits with samples, a synth track, a second synth track, a loop of a melodic loop, a loop of a percussion loop, all stacked together to make something relatively quick here. Okay, so just to show you really quick a little bit how the connectivity works. So we have a basic track with a drum beats and then a couple of synth parts. Bass part and then okay. So let's say we sketch those out here on the Deluge and then we get back into the studio and we want to connect those to other synthesizers. So with this connected via MIDI to Ableton Live, it's already integrated into my whole hardware setup. And each one of my synthesizers has its own unique MIDI address from 11 to 16. And so what I can do is if I mute these out and I just play the bass part here, this bass track right now is a synth track. But with the Deluge, if I just put this one button, if I push this one button, MIDI, now it's a MIDI track and it's sending on MIDI channel 1. But there's no sound because I don't have a synthesizer set up to receive a MIDI channel 1. But if I turn this until I get to 11, that's going to hit my first synth. So that's actually that exact same pattern that I was playing on a synth, flipped to a MIDI pattern, and now it's sending those MIDI notes out and playing the subsequent 37. So I can now adjust that synth on the synth. And it's that simple to take a sketch and integrate it back into here. I can then record the audio from the Sub 37. I can record the MIDI from the Deluge. I can then move the MIDI around. I can double it up. I can add multiple parts. I can record this on one synth and then flip it to another synth. So for example, if I'm playing it on this right now, it's the Sub 37. But if I turn it to 12, now it's playing on the Korg Minilog XD. So it's exactly the same MIDI part. The Deluge is just telling another synth to play that exact same part. And I can then adjust that synth. Or I can send it to another synth. Now it's going to the SH01. Now it's going to the low Minotaur. I can bring it back. So I kind of like the bass part on the subsequent 37, so I'm going to leave that one there. Go back into my song mode. I'm going to highlight this other synth track. I don't really like that sound, but it was a way for me to sketch something out, so I can flip that to MIDI just by pushing MIDI. If I want to make it back into a synth track, I just hit synth again. I can change the sound. Or I can hit MIDI. Now it's sending out to MIDI channel 1 again, so I'm going to move this until... So you see, it's very easy to start something out as a sketch here, move it into a full-blown hardware setup, and then still be able to go back and forth and actually use the material that you create in the Deluge to make other things. So one of the things I really love about this is that everything that you do in this is very usable, where, you know, with the circuit tracks, for example, you can sketch some ideas out, but then it's really hard to get those ideas, you know, more than one track at a time into your full setup. This, I could have 5 different synth parts that I can send to 5 different MIDI destinations within this hardware setup at the press of a button, just going from synth to MIDI. And if I decide that I want to come back to synth, I just go back to synth. Or if I want to go back to MIDI, so that's MIDI now. And that's right back to synth. So it's very usable. You can bounce back and forth. You can make it MIDI, record your MIDI notes into your DAW, make it back into a synth. You can make it MIDI, send it to another destination and record from that destination, record the audio from the synthesizer, from the output of whatever synth you send it to. So very usable and very easy to do, to flip those things from one to another and use them any way you want. So there you have it, Synthstrom Deluge, my new favorite piece of gear. I'm blown away. I'm blown away by it. I've never seen anything like this before. It's crazy. Thanks for hanging out. Hope to see you in the next video.